Welcome to Bold Agendas, the podcast where we explore topics of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. Today on Bold Agendas, I'm joined by Deborah Ancona, and she's the professor of work and organizational studies at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Deborah's career has been devoted to understanding how leaders and teams thrive in conditions of complexity, uncertainty, and rapid change. At MIT, Deborah founded and led the MIT Leadership Center, where her work on leadership and team dynamics has shaped the practice of executives across industries and geographies. She's collaborated with thought leaders like Peter Senge to reframe how we think about leadership, moving beyond the myth of the complete, all-knowing individual to a more distributed, adaptive, and human-centered model. Her research has bridged rigorous academic study and practical application, influencing how organizations build leaders, develop their teams, and create the conditions for innovation. From her teaching at Sloan to her widely cited work on leadership frameworks and team design, Deborah has guided thousands of leaders in rethinking what it truly takes to succeed when the future is unclear. I'm Mimi Brooks, and this is Bold Agendas, leading when no one is complete. Let's get started. Deborah, we're so glad to have you here. As I was saying before we got live, this is just a perfect discussion at the right time. It's a river that runs through all of the clients that we're talking to, and I think everyone is struggling a bit with how to think about adapting leadership models and frameworks to, the advent of AI seeping into everything, important in terms of process and people and jobs, and decision-making within enterprise. So this is a perfect time for us to be having this discussion. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And yes, we see that at MIT as well, the demand for AI courses, AI content, AI readings. And yet, when you're dealing with AI, there's a technology, but it is the leadership and the teamwork and all of these other things that can be as much of a stumbling block as getting the right technology. So yeah, great to be here.
For sure. I would say in all the discussions that we've done on this topic so far with people from all over the industry, the one thing that we all agree to is that it really isn't about the technology. It really is about the people, systems in the organization, leadership and otherwise, governance, et cetera, that are going to have to lead this and make it work because, otherwise we've got a tail wagging the dog problem, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Perfect. So let's jump in because what I wanted to do was to spend some time making sure that people understand the work that you've done, the framework that you've developed over the last several years for leadership and their teams. And when I initially started looking at your work, some of it goes back to 2007 that still create, some of the pillars of the discussion and the framework as it exists today, right? So maybe we can start with that. Maybe we can start with how you started putting this framework together. I'll point to the incomplete leader model that you started talking about back then, and then maybe we can add some of the pieces. So why don't we start with that and give me some context for what you were thinking back then?
Sure. So as it turned out, there were four of us who were involved in thinking about how do we bring leadership into MIT Sloan. And so we did a lot of reading. We did a lot of work looking at the research. We spoke to leaders and we deconstructed how they went about organizational change. So four of us at the time, Vonda Olikowski, Tom Malone, Peter Senge, and myself, really spent about a year wrestling with this question of what is leadership? How do you break it down into capabilities because it's such an amorphous concept. And so it is through that work that we generated the 4CAPS, which later became the 4CAPS Plus model that we have since used with thousands of people, used in X360, which is a 360 instrument built on the model. So all of that started just because we wanted to say, what's the model we want to bring into the classroom? What's the model we want to bring to our executives?
Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that was the initial exercise that you were trying to do when you started, pulling these concepts together. So that's really interesting to me. So am I right in saying that, the umbrella concept, back then, was the idea of the incomplete leader? Am I saying that correct? So it really starts with this idea of the leader not being reasonable that any single leader would convey and hold all of the attributes that equal great leadership. So can we talk about that just a little bit? How did you get to the point of the incomplete leader, and what were you trying to say?
Sure. Well, one of the things we noticed is that people kind of are always trying to be perfect, and we don't want leadership to be perfect. We don't want people to have ideas of what it is they need to do. And part of the incomplete leader goes hand in hand with the notion of leadership signatures, that each person has their own unique way of leading, and that if we're going to work together, if we are going to have systems of distributed leadership at every level, then people kind of need to know what their signature is and to look around at what everybody else's signature is to figure out how best to work together. And so this notion of the incomplete leader, you don't have to do everything and be everything. You can be incomplete in your own signature. And when we talk to executives about this, so often there's sort of a relaxation of the shoulders, right?
Exactly.
Because we're holding ourselves up to these standards that can't possibly be met. And so that's where the idea came from. But it's hard to let go of this idea of the complete leader because there are so many forces that push us to think we need to be complete or perfect. For example, if you ask people models of leadership, the hero model of leadership is alive and well. We're looking to that one person who is going to do it all and fix everything and take care of us and do all of that. That is alive and well in many people's brains in terms of what is leadership. It's the notion of a hero.
Yeah,
and
good point.
that is difficult. Also, our role models, the people we hold up, not everybody is going to be Satya Nadella or Michelle Obama or whoever it is that you bring up. We are not all going to be those people. And even those people, the people that we bring up, social media and PR and everything else pushes us to take away the blemishes and take away the things that aren't working and the weaknesses that are there. So what we see on the screen or out in video or wherever we are pulling leadership in is not really reality.
Yeah.
It is a manufactured reality. So
I was going to say
people
that
are
to what you said, excuse me. I was going to say that I think that's a very big idea because often it's those people who are the first to cite their teams, and they cite it with high recognition relative to what they were good at themselves and what they felt they really needed to have on the team in terms of capabilities that were not their strengths in order to make sure that they brought kind of the complete picture. So, it's funny that people hold them up, as you said, as heroes, but they tend to often say very quickly and with a lot of awareness, what their strengths and capabilities were and what they were looking to bring in terms of, those around them.
And I think that's part of what makes them great leaders.
Right.
Because if we're going to fight against the hero model, if we're going to fight against perfectionism, I mean, that's another thing. I'm writing a book now on family ghosts, and a lot of people bring perfectionism into the organization. And so they want to be perfect. And how do you fight against that? It's by these great role models stepping back and saying, hey, I don't have it all. My team helps me all the time, showing vulnerability, showing that they have weaknesses and faults, and that leadership is a human thing. And two eras to be humans. So we have to accept that.
Have you seen, I'm just curious before I leave this topic, just given, the folks that you get to interface with every day, have you seen any change of that concept, generationally when you think about your students now who, you're teaching? Is there a sense that, these heroes are still what they're aspiring to or what they, believe are what constitutes leaders, or do you see that changing, as a generational idea at all?
I still see people holding up these leaders, searching for leaders, searching for who do I want to be, and focusing in on someone. I don't see that
That's
disappearing.
interesting. That's interesting. So let's add to the model. So if the umbrella is the incomplete leader, then as you said, we start getting into some of the building blocks, and an important idea are these four caps or four capabilities. And they seem to me to be more of a system than independent ideas. Can you just kind of get the four of them on the table and talk about them, separately and then together?
Sure. So 4 capabilities. First one is sensemaking, making sense of the context in which you are operating. This is the idea that, particularly in AI, so we'll get to that later, but in this exponentially changing world, the need for sense making is even higher. We need to understand what's going on out there in the environments in which we are leading. And sense making helps you to do that. It helps you to sort of say, okay, I have an open mind. What do I see? What can I learn from others? How do I pull all this information that's out there together in some kind of way that can be useful to me and my team and my organization? So sense making is that process of what Carl Weick, who is the father of sense making, calls cartography, that leaders are cartographers. They're map makers. And that's what sense making is. Can I make a map of this crazy world of ours? Because if I don't have a map, I don't know how to go forward. So that's essentially what sense making is. Second is relating, because leadership happens with and through other people. And so as relating is creating trusting relationships with people in my team, in my organization, and outside. All of my work is permeated by the idea of the need to be externally active. We can't just talk to the people who are next to us. We really need to engage in the broader ecosystem. That is the way that business is working these days. You cannot be isolated and alone. The third piece is visioning. So sense making is about what's going on now. Can I map our current reality? And vision is, where are we going? How do we create a compelling future where people want to go and communicate it in a motivating way? Because the essence of leadership is motivation, is getting people excited to come to work on what they're doing. And they can't do that if they don't have an image of the future that they want to be part of. So that's the whole visioning component. The last piece is inventing. And inventing is not inventing a new product. It is inventing the processes and structures needed to move toward the vision. So how do we get there? You need to execute, but you also need to innovate. You need to create psychological safety. You need to encourage others along the way. How do you begin to move the organization? It's kind of the engine, if you will, of change and moving toward the vision. So that's each of the components. But as you say, those components are interdependent in some very clear ways. Sense making and relating build on each other. When you're sense making, if you're doing it not just on the computer, but talking to people, being with people, then you are increasing your relating. And when you're talking to people, you're also sense making about them, about their world, about their business. So those two really feed on each other quite a bit. The second thing is that we think of the sense making and relating as enabling factors. They enable action. You can't do anything unless you understand the world that you're trying to do it in, and you have a set of people motivated to work with you. The other making this because we sometimes have a diamond. So I'm creating the diamond on screen here. The other axis is axis of action. Action is visioning. Where are we going and how do we get there? So you need to enable action and then you need to take action. You need to enable it and you need to take it. And so those two axes go back and forth. And I think the third area of interdependence, particularly now, particularly as the speed of change is just
exponential,
creating
exponential.
exponential chaos for all of us.
Right.
Sensemaking, it turns out, is extremely pivotal right now. It predicts the data that we have on this. It predicts your ability to envision the future. If you don't know the present, how do you envision the future? It predicts your ability to be credible, because it turns out that people like people who understand what's going on in the environment and can communicate it. So that builds your credibility. And it also helps you to implement what you're doing in the organization. Again, because you have some sense of what's going on and can communicate that sense.
I think that's a big idea, right? And I wonder if some of the communication came in a strong way in the credibility dimension that kind of runs a bit as a foundation underneath those capabilities, right? In terms of being able to influence and motivate, tell the story, not just that you can imagine it, but that you can convey it in a way that people will suit up and march towards it. So there's this, ability to create the narrative that resonates and causes, action by people who are trusting a lot of this as a faith idea, faith in the leader, faith in your ability to do it. For whatever reason, I believe you can pull this off, right? So I wonder if the continual narrative across those capabilities is a part of the credibility that runs underneath this as well.
Absolutely. And credibility is the addition. The building credibility is an addition to the model later after the work that we did early on. Because if people don't think you have integrity, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you do a lot of sense making or not. People are not going to go with you. And so how do you get that credibility and build that integrity? One way is, as you're saying, it's that ability to tell the story and to show people what's going on. Another piece that we look at is the notion of doing what you say you're going to do. If you look at some of the definition, actually, of integrity, it means that you do what you say you're going to do and you live up to the values that you talk about. If you say, we have to get going here, it's most important, everybody's got to do their share, and you show up to work at 10 o'clock, I mean, that's a small example, but it is the notion that you've got to be in there. You've got to model that. You've got to do what you say you're going to do and live the story that you're telling. If we think about your idea of telling the story, you have to live it as well as tell it.
Credibility was an important piece, right? Right, Deborah? I mean, the credibility
Absolutely.
is a bit of a force multiplier here almost, right? On top of, to what sits on top of the model, relative to you can't be everything to everyone all the time, the incomplete leader, the capabilities are individual, but they also amplify each other under different contexts and scenarios. And then credibility becomes like this force multiplier against this that allows us, I think, particularly in these times, to deal with the nonlinear pace of change, for example.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's interesting. The part of the way that credibility ended up in the model is actually via some other work. So Hal Gregerson and I were doing a study of what is MIT leadership, because when people think about leadership, particularly in the Boston area, they think about Harvard. Harvard creates the leaders. And we were like, wait a second, MIT has created over 30,000 companies worth trillions of dollars. There's actually some leadership going on there.
Right.
And part of what that leadership is about, which we learned through this work that we did, is it's not about you. It's not egocentric leadership. It's an ability to say, we're in this together. We're here not because I need to get my career to take off, but because they're important problems, they're important challenges in the world, and we've got to work together to make that happen. So part of our building credibility is this notion of it's not egocentric. It is about leadership for some
Yeah,
purpose.
it's more value
Uh,
centric, right? I mean, if you're really going
exactly.
to point to it, it's value centric, which which is interesting to see values in that context. So it gives a place for values and purpose, right? And again, we hear a lot of that discussion. So I like it, kind of contained in the model. It seems really important. Can I ask you a question before I add teams into this and start building on this? I just want to get your opinion about this. All of the talk around servant leadership, I'm wondering how you see that relative to your model.
Yeah, so all of these things, all of these capabilities can be used in the context of servant leadership. And if you're a servant leader, then probably some of that credibility is extremely high because it's not at all about ego, it's about helping others. Um, so you can be a servant leader and still do sense making and visioning and so on and so forth. They can take on different forms. So it's not explicitly a servant leadership model in that we're not saying you as a leader, your role is to serve others, is to help others, although you can use the model in that way. And the only thing I would say about servant leadership is, as I said, I'm currently doing work on these ghosts, these family patterns that come into the organization, and uh, servant leadership is great. It is not great when it's carried too far, when people lose themselves in the need to please other people or help other people.
Yeah.
And so any of the leadership models that we bring up, at least I see in the executives that talk about their histories and their styles, you want to be very careful about bringing any particular form of leadership up to say this is it, because it's not it for everybody. Everybody has to have their own. That's the leadership signature, their own signature that builds on their values and their skills and abilities. But it's also that any of these taken to an extreme can be problematic for
I think
people.
that's a great point. And I wonder, I'm not saying it explains everything, but I wonder if servant leadership in part, you know, came about as people were trying to express humility as a balanced idea in leadership. Now, not something that you would have heard of, decades ago, Deborah, that, humility would be such a strong and desirable value, but it is today. It's obviously
Yeah.
considered quite a strength. So I wonder if another way of saying that is almost to make it, a noun. You know what I mean? So it seems like perhaps that's a bit of a communicating an
Well,
idea. What do you think?
yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And, you know, narcissism or being out there as here I am, I'm great, that kind of leadership provokes the idea that we need more
Yeah.
humility. And
Yes.
sometimes if we get carried away on the humility side, it maybe it takes away the idea that we also have to have our signature and be strong in that and stand up for ourselves as well as for others.
Yeah.
So any of these things can, as I said, get
Can get
taken
a
to
little out of whack if
extremes.
if
Yeah.
if you put them in a funny place on the stack, if you will. Yeah, I think that the signature was a good thing to kind of pull in to add balance to that. That makes sense to me. So, can we go into, the work that you've done that's obviously related and connected to this and just as important around teams and the whole X team concept that you came up with? When was this? When did you start talking about this, Deborah?
This was way, 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 way back. We're talking all the way back because, yeah, this started with my dissertation, which I can assure you was way, way, way back. And when I started that, the whole model, what makes for effective teams, was all about internal team process. It still is, actually. Most of the best-selling textbooks on teams
Agreed.
are about internal team dynamics.
Amazingly
It's
so.
goals, clear roles,
Right.
cohesion in the team, psychological safety, although Amy's work came later. It's about synergies and being able to have effective meetings and on and on and on and on. It's all internally centered. And then what we did was we studied whether or not all of those things created high-performing teams. And it didn't. That's what propelled the whole idea. Well, then what are we missing? It's not that that's wrong. It's not that those things are unimportant. They are very important. But there's something missing because those variables predict how well we think teams are doing, but not actual performance. And that's pretty crazy.
Let me tell you, I find this fascinating, sincerely, when I look at how your work has evolved and the amount of time that the initial concepts came out. So if you look at something like the incomplete leader, to your point, it's not that you don't still find remnants of, heroic leadership and other anti-models, if you will. But you could say that there are concepts of people being incomplete and human, et cetera, that are more accepted and understood now in terms of, what do we really expect from our leaders? But when I look at the X-team concept, I want you to explain it. I would say, I think that most teams that we see inside an organization are not encouraged, led, structured, to hold some of the capabilities that you're really looking for here in X teams. It's amazing to me how immature, if I would say it as a maturity model, how immature some of these capabilities are in teams. Do you think that's true?
It is a severe disappointment to me. We wrote an original book years ago. We just redid the X-Team book, so there's a 2023 version of it now. We updated everything.
I didn't realize that.
But,
okay.
But the fact that we had to do it again is sort of emblematic of the fact that for some reason, people think of teams and team performance as being internal process. And there are a gazillion models for that. The grippy model, the focus. I love Amy's work, Don't Misunderstand Me, on psychological safety. There's a new book out on emotional intelligence in teams. All of that is important stuff. But we have a ton of data that says you need that and X teams, for people in your audience who don't know what we're talking about, X teams are externally oriented teams. It's not cross-functional teams. It means that teams have to be active inside the team, but also active across their boundaries. They need to do boundary spanning in the form of they have to do sense making, just like I talked about sense making earlier. They have to make sense of the context in which they're operating. They have to engage in ambassadorship to align with strategic initiatives up and down the company. They have to get resources from senior level leaders and buy-in from those people. And they need to coordinate, not just within the team, but also outside the team. No team these days operates in a vacuum. If you're new product development, you've got manufacturing, you've got engineering, you've got marketing, you've got all these groups that have to be aligned with what you're doing. You have to coordinate much more outside now. Post-COVID, there are a lot more partnerships between and among organizations.
Porous enterprise, right? It's porous enterprise concepts. Yep.
So we're talking about all of these things, and yet we're not, we're pushing organizations in this new direction, but we are not giving teams the skills they need to operate effectively in that world.
I have to tell you, it seems to me that at least in part, and you tell me what you think, that I've seen is that, we went from internal silos, organizational silos, that could be by department, by region, by function, whatever, and teams within the silos. And there's still a lot of that, Deborah. There's still a lot of, team inside team nesting, right? And so, when we put that on its horizontal, to say not the vertical view of the team inside, the hierarchy spoke of the enterprise, but, across the enterprise, we created this concept of cross-functional teams, and that, again, in my opinion, is still relatively immature on what you would expect to be the maturity spectrum, given how long we've been talking about this. Now you come in with an organizational structure, whether it's affected the hierarchy or not, that is truly an ecosystem by marketplace definition, Deborah. By marketplace definition, it's an ecosystem. Where are my workers? Inside the business, outside the business? Who's selling my product? Inside the business, outside the
It's
business? You know, what really is my sector anymore? Is it an industry
it's
sector or is it cross sector? So the answer is all of those, which defines, I think, this ecosystem that you were talking about in the beginning. And so now, where are teams? Teams that exist in the ecosystem, by definition, they've got to follow the porous walls of, let's just call it, the operations or supply chain of the business, which is in and outside of the business freely. Like, the boundary spanning that you're talking about is pretty broad, right?
absolutely. And yet, as you are pointing out, I've been doing this work for over 25 years. It's a long time. And I still go into the classroom. I teach this stuff all the time. We create X teams all the time, organizations that bring in X teams. And yet I go into the classroom. I teach mostly executives or exec ed. I go in and I always ask the question, what makes for a high performing team? And out comes all the things I just said: clear goals, clear roles,
Really?
synergies, trust, good communication. All of those things come out. And almost never does anyone say external sense making, external ambassador. They don't have to
Wow.
use that
Yeah,
language, but
anything
even
close to
just
that. Yeah.
anything close to that is not mentioned. And so I always say to the students, I start out with, this is the world. We watch a video. This is the world and what's changing right now in AI and machine learning and big data, all the trends that are going and changing our world right now. Okay, so what do you need to do in that world? You need to partner. You need to learn. You need to innovate. You need to, figure out what others are doing. Okay, but then when I say, well, what makes a team effective? I say, well, what happened to all those things that need to
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
They're absent.
Right.
They're absent in the way we think about team building, the way we think about structuring teams, what we expect team members to do. It's zero.
Yeah. I mean, it goes to it, in part, all the other examples that you're giving, but just the idea of for sense making, where are they getting signals from? What signals might they be following in terms of what's happening in the marketplace and what's happening with customers and people and what's happening, the whole concept of where I get my signals from is a pretty significant idea if the answer is that my signals come to me in a pretty insular fashion, right?
I always use the example of Satya Nadella because he is
Yes.
such an icon of leadership right now. And if you look at Satya Nadella, every day, every single day, he is having meetings with other CEOs from other industries, meeting with customer groups, meeting with supply chain folks. He meets with venture capitalists to find out, what are
Just to
you
learn.
funding?
Just to
What are you
learn.
funding? Yeah.
Right.
What are you funding? What are the newest technologies you're paying attention to, and so on and so forth? Who else should I speak to learn about this? It's a learning mindset rather than a fixed mindset or a we just have everything here. And what Satya Nadella did in his first senior team meeting was two things. One, he said, you see those vans out there? You guys are all going in those vans to do customer visits. Because what was he doing? He was saying an external perspective is what we need. And
Yeah.
X teams are basically a mantra of out before in. Go talk to the customer before you build the product. I mean, very simple ideas
Right.
that seem no-brainers, and yet it doesn't happen. And the second thing he did was bring in the heads of companies that Microsoft had acquired, and said, you sit with these people at lunch because they know something about the market and the environment that we don't know, and learn what they know so that you can learn it too. So again, he's very strong on this idea of out before in, of an X-team mentality.
When you think about it, it's on one sense, it sounds, like just different doors into the same party. You could say that. Or you could look at it and say, no, the origin of the momentum is exactly the opposite. It's not left to right, it's right to left. I mean, it couldn't be more opposite to say we start with an external perspective. What have others done in this situation? What have our customers think about this? How have other companies succeeded or failed here? What lessons are there to learn? What lessons are there to learn before we walk into this as if we're the first people to take this journey?
Right. So if you are more isolated, you start off with more limited information. You're starting off with trial and error learning when you should be really building on the expertise of others and starting at a much higher place.
Yeah.
And not only that, when you do this intensive internal team building, it makes you less apt to go outside. You build your expertise, you build your belief that you know the answer, and it makes you less open to going outside. So we always start our teams. We create a lot of X teams at MIT and Exec Ed. And the first thing is out before in. All right, go learn.
Yeah, I love that. The other thing that I'm seeing too, Deborah, I wonder if it's part of your discussions is that outside in is important too, that we go to other industries who might be having similar issues or challenges to us in a different but highly relatable context. And I think that's important because if you take some industries, that themselves are pretty insular, um, utilities, for example, just to pick one, but there would be others as well. Um, it's great that they learn from each other, fantastic, than just sitting inside the business. But there's a lot of opportunities to look at other industries for customer service solutions, for example, for dealing in highly regulated markets, for example, with dealing with contracted employees and the changing nature of those relationships, for example. So, I think this idea of, looking outside your industry to find innovations that maybe are sitting maybe on the fringe within your industry is also a good idea, particularly now.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And a lot of the consulting firms that help with innovation, that help with product design or new product development, that's what they all do. They all bring in people from different fields, from different industries,
Right.
to open up the thinking. Because how do I not get too academic here? But teams, when teams come together, there's a lot of anxiety, and you get what's called solution mindedness, very convergent thinking. Let's come up with an answer to the problem we have to solve and then get working on it. So we converge very readily. And what an X team does is start with the idea of no, first we diverge before we converge. First, we get out there and get all these different perspectives so that we have a wider net of ideas from which to innovate.
Yeah.
And an example, it's an old example, but IDEO, the product design company, one of the things that they developed, there's those water bottles, that you pull up and you can drink, and then you push down and it stops.
Yep.
That came from a blood analyzing company where they were putting blood through tubes, and they needed these valves to keep the blood in one section and then go to a net. That valve, that's now on a water bottle.
Yeah, it's a great
That
point.
is kind of the example of what you're talking about, where you can borrow and then you can invent by borrowing.
I think that I love the example. I think this is also a topic that suffers a bit from, change of mindset that you were talking about before, because I think that there's something very comforting to people about converging. So I'm going to get everybody together and we're all going to converge. And the faster we can converge, to your point, that we can say, that's red, that's a red ball. Now, what do we want to do with it? We're like, whew, red balls, here's what we can do, blah, blah, blah. The concept of converging, versus I think that at times what could be looked at as the conflict of not converging, and it has almost a negative connotation to it, as opposed to we're going to live in the exploratory stage here long. We're going to live long before we start distilling it down to the action items, the name of the thing, the answer to the question, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and when we've done some of the longitudinal work in this space, teams that are exploring first often are not that satisfied because they aren't cohering on goals. They're learning from outside, and that's uncomfortable for people. Whereas the ones that converge right away, okay, then you can build that team spirit. You can get the T-shirts. You can do all these things. And when you're not doing that, you look around and say, "Oh, how come we haven't figured it out yet?" So there is discomfort, but over time, those teams actually become more cohesive because they've created solutions that work better. So high performance and adaptation and innovation creates satisfaction. It's not the other way around.
Yeah. It's almost like a productivity in problem solving. You don't have the answer, but what you get good at is how to leverage the diversity and strength of the team, to bring in insights and ideas that really get factored, I think, relatively quickly or efficiently with the team that knows how to work together. It's not a convergence. It's an understanding. It's like we're building a shared understanding and weaving in and knowing when to put something on the sideline and say, not the best fit in terms of idea. But the teams get quite good at it.
Yeah, and leaders don't have to have all the answers to have credibility. If the leader explains, we're in explore mode, we're not going to be here forever, we are going to converge later, but we're leaving this time open, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do these interviews. We're going to do this. I had a bunch of ex-teams that were working in a pharma company. Okay, before we do anything else, we're going to go and talk to biotech companies, and we're going to go and talk to leaders in the pharma who are ahead of us on this, and industry experts and gurus and economic analysts, and ask particular questions about how they do product development. And that's what we're doing. So having that structure, so it's not explore is chaotic. Explore can be quite clear.
Oh, yeah. Quite a almost intellectually structured pursuit. You know what I mean? It's not like you're wandering around in the woods.
What should we do? Let's go talk to this person.
Exactly.
No, you want a script. What are you going to ask about? And what do you want answers to? And so the credibility comes because you know the process to follow, not necessarily the answer to the question.
I think I was just going to make a comment that was similar to that. And I think that as we start considering, so what happens to all these, human structures, leadership like this, teams like that, as we go forward, as we bring in our, AI agents and actors into the ecosystem. And I think that in this context that we were talking about in terms of productivity of exploratory, teams and the value of that, it seems to me that one of the things that works well is when the team or the leader, knows how to ask the right questions at the right times. Not the right answers, or the right questions at the right time are much harder and yet profoundly useful thing to get right. And I think that concept is going to be key, Deborah, as we move into hybrid teams, human and AI teams, that we're kind of clear about the transition of questions, through the process of collaboration.
Right. Well, and I mean, there's a lot of work out there. What we know about in terms of AI is that you need to learn how to prompt. The better the prompt, the better the answer. That's the same thing. It's what questions are you asking AI to answer? Because the prompt that you give it determines the answer you will get. So you want to be very, very good at asking questions and at knowing also when do we need the humans and when do we need the AI.
That's right. So let's transition. Let's take the the structure of the model that you've been working on for years and put it up against, an emerging intelligent organization and ask the question, so how do these concepts work there? So if I took what we were just talking about, I could have attributed to a few different attributes of the model, but let me put it against sense making, because I think that, part of that concept of leaders needing to be good sense makers and to have people around them that know how to do that, now gets both richer and more complex potentially as we bring in machines sensing, analyzing, and recommending about their environments. And they become considerations, right? They become considerations, ideas, input to the human leader. And so I wonder, whether what we're talking about as we include machine intelligence, into the enterprise context is leaders or others moving into almost this mega sense making, sitting, it's not humans in the loop, it's AI in the loop. I really object to humans in the loop. Just the physical picture that I get of that never really quite sits with me, but AI in the loop. And now sense making has got to pull up to a level that can take that context in as well as part of, decision making. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think that first of all, I think that AI is going to put our sense making on steroids, which is good because we need to do more of it, more and more of it as time goes on. So the amount of innovation in this space is amazing. Just an example, Tammy Savage, who was one of the people running a team at Microsoft, who helped us to develop the whole concept early on. So she was running this great team, which we talked about in the first book, not so much in the second book. Anyway, she has since left Microsoft, and she just started a new company called It. And again, I'm not advertising or marketing or anything else, but her company basically collects data like Waze, Waze for cars, all the different decision makers in the organization. The data come in, and she can look at things like sales wins. So who won and what was behind that, or who pricing. What do different deals look like if you have this price versus that price? Even looking at emails to look at morale. Are people up? Are people down? I mean, just incredible in real time sense making that AI can do right now. Or, okay, we're leading this kind of change. Who's doing it and who's not doing it? Where are the problems? Where is it working? I mean, that can be identified, which is amazing. So on the positive side is all of that is happening. On the negative side, so and this is sense making, but also inventing. If you look at that study with BCG and putting AI into the consulting world, that AI is amazing. So having AI in your team to help with consulting projects, it's amazing. It improves productivity. It improves errors. It improves
like analytic reach,
quality, analytic reach, quality, speed. All of those things are great, but that's only in certain domains. When it goes outside of the domain of expertise where it was trained, it actually makes more errors. So if you're working with AI on your team, you have to be really clear. You have to know when it's right and when it's wrong, and be watching for that. So you can't have AI as just a member. The other thing that came out of that study was that the consultants became very over-reliant on the AI. It was like candy. I don't have to do the work. I'm just going to ask AI. And then when they got an answer from the AI as opposed to other people, they believed it more. It's coming from this technology, so that's the right answer. When there's still hallucinating going on, there is still the way, as you said, you ask the question can determine which answer you get. So that's problematic. So there's incredibly upside potential, and variance in answers across consulting groups went way down, and people were scared. I'm losing my creativity because I don't create anymore. I just listen. I'm a passive taker in of this. And so I think this notion of partnering with AI can bring us to unbelievable spaces, and we have to be really, really careful about it.
Yeah, of course I agree with that. And, my day job is in consulting. So I know exactly what you're talking about there, relative to, the productivity advantages. And look, we're a productivity performance based industry. I mean, that's what we get paid for. It's not a nice thing. It's the
Right.
only thing. And, so there's a lot of enticing ideas about that. But, the concept of, what makes it, um, intelligent and contextually right and balanced and then insightful. Where did the insight, really come from in terms of some of the leaps of recommendations or decisions based on, the risk tolerance of the client, for example, which makes a big difference in how you recommend things. So, there's and what you recommend. So there's a lot of factors like that. When I think about sense making, though, from a leadership perspective and the changing nature of the work environment and how leaders think about sense making for themselves in terms of a capability from the model and how they think about it organizationally, as the capabilities of the organization, start evolving in line with AI. I'm wondering if you have any, thoughts or you're hearing discussions about, how leaders might be adapting to this environment, to deal with sense making in a, I don't know, broader scale, in a wider context, what do you think it is?
Yeah. So I think that couple of answers. So my brain immediately
Yeah,
went
go.
into three different directions, so I'll have to pull it back and
That's good.
and go. There was an article with an interview with the CEO of Duolingo about AI, and it was a little controversial because he had said to his people, "I don't want you to hire anyone for a job that AI can do." And some people outside the organization read it as, well, they don't want people. They do want people, but they want people to be thinking, sense making about what are the jobs we have? Where can AI fit? Where can AI add value? Where do people add value? So that we're beginning to think and sense make about where are the opportunities. At Duolingo, they also have Friday mornings. It's not called Friday. It's FRAI. Friday
Okay,
and
got it.
AI.
Friday and AI. Yep.
Yeah. And the goal of the groups in that AI Friday, I just call it AI Friday because I
Yep.
don't know exactly how they pronounce that, is that each of the groups are experimenting with different ways that they can use AI. And so that's experimenting as a form of sense making. Where does it work? Where does it not work? How can it be useful? How is it not useful? And the reason I bring that forward is because it's a focus. The whole organization is moving in that direction and learning together, sense making together about how to use it and how not to use it. And it seems to me that that's actually better than people who are either only experimenting. Let's run 8 million experiments to see what's going to work and what's not working, which gives you all kinds of crazy data, or a strategic move. We have to use it here. You want both of those to do sense making. You want the experiments to inform your strategy and your strategy to inform your experiments, so that you're saying, well, what do we need to understand and how can we use this technology in the best way? And that's what we're learning together. But it's in a more focused both and, where we're experimenting and we're thinking strategically, where we're working on our own, what we bring to the table, and thinking through what AI can bring to the
I think
table.
that makes sense. And, sometimes you tell me whether this is aligned to what you're describing as well. Sometimes I think that if we think about the vision, I'll say vision strategy side of things, we look at that dimension, I think that what we're starting to see um, in organizations is this concept of, strategy being an always on, ever present idea. And I think that as AI becomes, a more integral part of our leadership decision making capability, to bring concepts like sense making together with machine analysis recommendations and sense making outcomes. And then people decide, what am I going to do with that? Take that recommendation as is, modify it in some way or another, whatever. What I think it creates is this very tight cycle of strategy always on, and the ability to watch those signals simulate a future reality that I'm not living in today before I live in it. Think digital twin organizations, whatever analogy you want to bring in, strategy becomes a, a North Star that I'm ever learning against, learning on multiple time scales, learning from multiple sources, and then deciding and decisioning, hopefully faster than my competitors, deciding and decisioning, relative to what action I take, strategy and operation, strategy and execution. You know what I mean? And it happens in much more of a interactive, I'll say real-time model as a result of, the ability for us to sense as a continual idea and sense on both machine and human timescales.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And in the X360, which is our 360 instrument to have people look at their own leadership signatures using that 4CAPS plus model, in visioning is a scale called strategic mindset. Because when we look at very innovative companies who are very nimble in what they do and practicing leadership, distributed leadership at all levels, what we found in the work in those companies is that people, even low down in the organization, can tell you what the strategy is. They can tell you,
right,
this is, these are the products we're selling. This is the kind of
big idea.
Big idea. These are our priorities. These are the customers we sell
Yep.
to. This is what we're trying to do. Way down in the organization, people can tell you that. That strategic mindset enables just exactly what you're
For
saying,
sure.
which is you have to have the strategic mindset to be
Yeah.
able to apply it to the use of AI, to whatever kind of inventing you're doing. Otherwise, it sits with senior level leaders and cannot be used in the way that you just talked about.
I think that's a very, very critical point, because to me, it's connecting the dots idea up and down and across the organization around how value is created by this business for those constituents of ours. It's a value creation concept, right, Deborah? And that people understand what you're telling me is the way that we create value as an organization. I understand it. I get it. I can internalize it and make decisions. It becomes cultural. Informal
Absolutely.
decision-making structures. It becomes cultural in terms of decisions, because it's not just that I understand it, but I see myself in it.
Yes, that's another part of,
Right?
yes, you
It's a
see
big
yourself in it.
idea. Now I can be a part of it and be a reliable part of it. You don't
Right.
need to worry
It's
about me. I understand
right.
what you're trying to do here.
Well, exactly. But and so you have that strategic alignment
Yes.
up and down the organization, and people then are more able to be free to act because they know they're acting with that strategic set of priorities and understanding in mind. So it's incredibly powerful.
Almost
In Yeah.
critically needed, right, Deborah, as we go forward, almost critically needed, call it, the purpose that binds, call it the North Star that we can all see, not just 10% of us. whatever it is, as, as we deal more with the intangibles, from a human perspective, ideas, opportunities, conflict, whatever it might be, the understanding of value creation becomes a big glue idea running through the organization, right?
Yeah, it's also an anchor. So if we're in chaotic times, then your leadership
Great
signature
point.
is an anchor for you in how to act. The organizational strategy is an anchor in how to act. It helps you to understand what the options are and what the correct or possible set of actions and decisions to make. And people who are stressed out in this world, who are anxious in this world, who are fearful of what is happening, they want those anchors. And
Great point. I love that point, because I think that while North Stars are clarifying, I don't think that they're naturally comforting. The anchor idea is more of a comforting idea to people. Like you say, it's grounding to me at a time when the chaos, is magnifying. I mean, the chaos is magnifying in a big way. So I love that. I'm going to take that, and I will take that away and use it going forward. Before I let you go, I just want to cover this one dimension in the future state that I didn't get to, and I think it's huge, and it's the relating or relational idea. Because if I wanted to pull that bucket out, in a thick way, I can talk about, the human machine relationship going forward. How do we think about these actors in our teams and ecosystems, and their objects and actors that I have relationships with, I rely on. How do I, to your point earlier, how do I rely on them? How much do I rely on them? And it really causes, I think, leaders as well as the organization to reconsider and probably be able to articulate new trust architectures. Can I say it like that, Deborah? Like new trust architectures, that bind the business to a set of relational ethics, if you will, in how we work, how we decision, how we decide, and the transparency associated with that.
yeah, I'm not sure how I feel in some ways about relating and machines. I mean, to me, a lot of people have already moved ahead. There are people machine teams, and they work well. And obviously, there's respect to the extent that you can respect a system or a technology, so that they're working together, and people seem actually quite comfortable with that. I think that they're like everything else. In fact, I gave a webinar today on AI and leadership, and one of the things I said we need to really work on is not an either or. It's both and. So it's good and bad. So there's goodness in working with these AI and creating these mixed hybrid teams, and yet I worry sometimes about developing relationships with the technology, because AI is getting very good at empathy. It's getting very
Yeah.
good at making us feel good about ourselves. Everything is great idea. How great that you thought about this. And yet we have to pull back and remember this is not real. This is not real empathy. This is not a person. I kind of almost feel like we want to preserve certain things for human to human, even as we bring AI in. And now this lawsuit for an AI, parents of a student, of a child who committed suicide because they were in deep relationship with AI. But the AI is not that we're not flawed as human beings as well. We are obviously flawed, but I just think that notion of relationship we have to be careful about.
Yeah.
Because it can pull us in a way that has us believing that it is a relationship like it is with a human being, and it's not.
I think that's of course, I think it's a great point. I think it's an important point. Sometimes, for me, personally, in some of the discussions that I have about it, it's almost easier to, I think, see the perspective or the angle that you're bringing that you're concerned about, if we make it a humanity issue. I don't know why when you say the humanity of it, it seems to affect people differently than when we say humans versus machines. What's the humanity of this, in the future? How do we think about, our humanness in a world that becomes much more uh, occupied, by machine thinking and machine learning, if you will. I think that's a very important point. That
Let
Go
me
ahead,
just
please.
so just add one more thing on that, and that is that in some research that we started doing, looking at AI individual relationships, people, as I said, feel very comfortable using AI for data collection, for advice, for finding patterns, for helping them out. Where they really draw the line is AI in leadership. Somehow AI as a leader brings up, maybe not later, maybe 3 years from now it won't, but at the moment, sort of fears of science fiction that, the robots are taking over,
Yeah,
the machines are taking over. And so we have a built-in kind of, oh, no, not there.
yeah.
There is a boundary. And I wonder if somehow we don't have that boundary when it's a coworker role for the
Oh,
AI.
listen, I'm sure you're right. I mean, it sounds like, the in charge idea, because it's still in charge. Leaders are still in charge, regardless of their leadership signature or approach, right? And so I wonder whether that's the piece that people, view as a bridge too far. So then machines are in charge. They're in charge of me. They're in charge of all of us. That's a different idea than I'm collaborating. I have
Right.
access to, agents and multiple agents likely going forward. I do think that issue notwithstanding, we still have to deal with these issues of new trust architectures, new trust models here. So if I just even isolated the relational idea, Deborah, to the trust context and say, how does trust work in the future in our AI enabled, businesses and organizations? I think that's a lot of work still ahead of us to
I
define
was going
what
to say,
that
I'm not
is.
sure I have the answer
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. No, I think a lot of it really is still ahead of us. Mostly, it seems to me that, we just need to be aware when we're talking about implementing capabilities that bump up against trust. And you don't see it. I think that's the bigger problem, is that you don't really see it as an ethical or a trust or a transparency issue. And in fact, it really is quite nested in a lot of that. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me just ask a couple of final questions. I'm going to let you go. I realize I've kept you a little longer, I think. Um, to your point earlier about having been discussing some of these issues, particularly like the X team issue for a long time, I'm just curious, what do you think, other than writing a third book about it, is is the solution, to um, the adaptation of organizational systems and structures as the world around us is changing so quickly? How what is it that is going to, cause, sustainable adaptation of organizational systems and structures like leadership, do you think, or teams or whatever going forward? Because it seems to be a bit of a laggard idea at times relative to, the business fast moving on the, I'll call it front end of innovation, technology, whatever coming in,
Yeah.
but the organizational systems, lagging behind.
I think that's a good question, and I wish I had the answer to it. I think I think that we are moving. I mean, the whole agile movement, and other things have said we have to change the way we're moving, but the technology may force us to change.
Right.
It may force us to change.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I do think that as leaders, we need to push on the innovation side, not just in technology and product, but also in process and organization. And because if we're not working now to build the muscle, I mean, if you take X teams, I don't care if you restructure your whole organization in X teams, that may be a bridge too far. But you, the leader, can tell your team, we need to be more externally oriented. And I want everybody to come in next week having spoken to a customer, having spoken to a supplier, having looked at who's innovating in the space we're in and what are they doing, looking at how technology is being used, looking at how can we use AI in this space. So it seems to me that we're almost over-focused on technology right now because AI and machine learning and all these technologies are taking over. And if the human side is going to keep up with, the human and organizational side are going to keep up with the technology, then we've got to do the same things that we're doing with the technology on the human side. We have to do experiments on how we structure teams. We have to do experiments with how do we get everybody to have a strategic mindset. We have to give people feedback on what they're doing and what they're not doing to move in that direction. Firms are moving, BCG, McKinsey, et cetera, they're all moving to more team-based organizations in order to be more adaptive. They're restructuring the whole kit and caboodle. So sometimes we have bureaucracy and hierarchy with kind of a team structure associated with it, but we're also now moving to like complete team structures in certain places. That's good. That's the big guys kind of pushing us forward. But then we are those of us who are in those organizations need to do that micro planning, that micro changing to make sure that we've got these muscles honed that are going to be necessary. And if you have some ideas about how to make that happen, tell me.
Well, listen, I would really more just echo what you said. From my vantage point, it's the idea of, the organizational systems and structures, being the yin and yang idea, to the marketplace systems and structures that we run, in making sure that what we're not doing is anticipating and designing the change of the organization last. You know what I mean? Last, as opposed to preferably slightly ahead of the rest of the organizational change when it involves, how we think about our customers, how we think about our value creation, how we think about, our concept of collaboration and the units of, teams or others that, that do that inside the business. Because I think that this idea of change, organizational change is the last mile, has been a long-standing idea, Deborah, inside most organizations. It's like we engineer all the go-to-market, product, innovation, change, and then the very last mile, and it was normally this, oh yeah, we need to tell people. By the way, we need to tell people. We just did that.
And we do the trickle down, each group says something, but just like we are getting people to, again, Duolingo, getting people to practice every Friday on how to use AI, maybe you also have on that every Friday is how can we have our team be more adaptive? How can we make it conversations with customers easier, that we begin to think, as you're saying, build in that organizational change early, not last.
Yeah. And if we did it early, right, Deborah, we would think about it less as change. I mean, sometimes I'm saying, can we stop even referring to it as change? Because it just naturally takes the last place in line. It loops around, it has that kind of momentum. And if we thought about it as organizational capabilities that are needed, like Sensemaking,
or learning,
whatever you want to call
How
it,
do we
organizational learning on multiple timescales. I think if we can put it in some type of capability context, then we would put it at the front end. We're more apt to put it at the front end of the evolution, excuse me, of the business than at the back end, because that's when I think it's too little, too late. And in this environment, with exponential movement of the organization, the degree of separation becomes big, fast. Readiness of people, for example, changing the workforce of the organization, deciding what the human work is going forward, et cetera, et cetera. If we're going to wait until, everything has been moved on the front end to see what the wave looks like when it hits everybody on the back end, you know what I mean? We're going to have a lot of people underwater,
Yeah. Well, and that's what we preach a lot is in this changing world, we need to build individual leadership capabilities of how to deal with that world. We need to build different kinds of teams, and we need to build different kinds of organizations. You can start anywhere, but all three of those are going to have to move to deal with this world.
Well, and this whole discussion that we just had, to bring it all around, isn't a technology discussion. It is a human discussion. We're asking, what is human value in the future? What are the contributions, we expect and need of people? What's differentiating about our people tomorrow versus what was differentiating about, us organizationally, 10 years ago, whatever. So I think it won't be to your point all along, I think it won't be the technology, where we, win or lose. I do think it will be the response of the organization and the brave approach of, doing that first instead of last, and the investment there, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Either way, there'll be, lots of content for academia and otherwise to take advantage of. Deborah, thank you very much. Is there any final words of advice or wisdom you'd like to leave with that we didn't cover? Because I'd love to hear it, then I'm going to let you go.
The only thing I might end with is there's so much work to be done, and there's so much anxiety in the system, and there is such chaos that we just need to remind ourselves that there is also a lot of fear and anxiety and trepidation that exists in the organization. And so we shouldn't forget that it's about learning and change and so on, but also about some calm and some ability to step back, to rest, to pause. I talk a lot about pausing so that you're able to, you can't learn if you don't pause. You can't learn if you don't take the time to say what's been going on and how do we process it. So just that we don't get another to-do list from all of this, we remember that we need a refresh every now and then.
I think it's a great point. We see it every day at the client sites that we work with. Sometimes it's really painful to see it. It's genuine, and I think it creates a lot of fatigue, a lot of organizational fatigue, but a lot of personal fatigue, for people. So there's a lot of good reasons that if machines are going to speed us up, one of the advantages should be that as humans, we can slow down to deal with the issues that require, some peaceful ways of thinking through things in order to have the outcomes that we're looking for. So couldn't agree with you more. Deborah, thank you so much. As I said, this discussion came at such a perfect time for our clients, and I know the questions that they often have. So thank you for participating. Thanks for showing up. And I sincerely enjoyed all of it. And I loved getting closer to the work that you've done over the last, 20, 25 years. It's an amazing body of both, study and imparting wisdom to, I think quite a wide range of constituents of your own. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed it.
Well, and thank you for having me, and thank you for your great questions and perspectives. It was a fun conversation.
I appreciate it. We'll have you back again, maybe after your next book comes out. I'd love to hear more about it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks, Deborah.